Anxiety serves a purpose, so we need to not get rid of it. We need to learn how to deal with it.
Today's guest is Dr. Paul Turke, who is a pediatrician and anthropologist exploring child health through an evolutionary lens. Today we're discussing Dr. Paul Turke's new book, Bringing Up Baby, an evolutionary view of pediatrics. And so thank you so much, Paul, for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
The last chapter of your book, I believe, is chapter 8. And in this chapter, it's titled Live Long and Be Helpful. So we're going to kind of start in the back end talking about kind of older people instead of the children. But basically, in this chapter, you say that we live longer today because grandparents are useful, not because old people are waiting around to be cared for by their children. And so I think it's quite interesting that, grandparents, the reason you're basically saying they live like humans live like twice as long as other primates, and it's because they're actually useful, not burdens on society. It seems like kind of like the opposite view the average person would have.
Yeah, you're exactly right in your summary there. The idea is that, back around 6 million years ago, when we split off, our lineage split off from all the other apes, we were all living maximum lifespans on the order of 50 years or so, with most probably not making it that long. But as we split, time rolled forward, our lifespans gradually expanded, reaching 100, even 120 years as a maximum by probably 500,000 years ago, but by no later than 300,000 years ago. And in order to get to that, to allow us to live longer, we had to delay and dampen down aging. And for that to happen, natural selection had to stay stronger for longer. And so it's particularly clear in the case of women, because we think menopause is ancient, that they had, for natural selection to stay stronger, you had to be reproductively useful, but it had to be indirect reproduction in the case of females that were menopausal. And so the most straightforward way for them to be reproductively viable would be to help their existing children and eventually their grandchildren, as we live long enough to overlap with our children's children. For males, it's a little less clear, because males obviously can make babies directly for their whole life, for as long as they live. But back in the day, when we were evolving up to our present state, that would have involved a lot of competition with younger, stronger males. So once males got to a certain age too, until we developed hierarchies and lived in settled communities and stuff where older males could control the power of younger males, older males probably would have had to rely on indirect reproduction also in order to be reproductively viable to older and older ages. And so, and the best way to do that is to be helpful to grandchildren. This is known as the grandmother hypothesis.
Paul, I was kind of thinking about how in the U.S., at least in 2014 or so, we actually started seeing a decline in the life expectancy in the U.S. This is 5 years before the COVID pandemic. And then I was kind of looking at like the life expectancy of other countries, and the U.S. is like somewhere around 50. Which for a country that spends so much money on healthcare and is supposed to be so advanced. But then after, when I was reading your book, I was wondering like, well, maybe it's because, our fertility rate's been dropping for years. A lot of the elderly aren't necessarily valued in the U.S. culture, where other cultures, the elderly are kind of revered and have a lot more maybe purpose or, motivation to, it's just a much different kind of dynamic.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. The changes that have happened in the last few decades or even few centuries are too short for natural selection to have accelerated aging or anything like that. But what has happened is, as people get older and they don't have as much purpose, like you say, and they don't have as healthful of lifestyles as we maybe did a few decades ago, and certainly a couple centuries ago. So, mortality rates certainly were higher back in the day, but most of that mortality was earlier. I think it's Peter Attia has talked about slow death and fast death. We've gotten really good in modern medicine in preventing fast death. But slow death, not so good. And when we live in a country where a lot of people are overweight and very sedentary and so on, and they don't have much to do in life anymore because their grandchildren, live hundreds or even thousands of miles away, and they don't get that kind of good social support and all that they used to, and have that sense of purpose. I think all those factors conspire to reduce the lifespan overall compared to some other countries where there's more purpose and maybe some healthier lifestyle there too.
So one of the more interesting sections of your book, I thought, was your discussion on autism. And I have a good friend of mine. He has a child that has autism, and I was talking to him about your book yesterday because he's asking me, like, oh, hey, what's your next guest? So I was telling him, and so he's like tried everything, trying to like help his son out. And I was talking to him about how in your book you talk about how like it could be near vision issues. Like you have a kid that is born really can't see that well, and it's not like he's taken to some optometrist or something. So all of a sudden, like when he's talking to, or when his mom's talking to him or a sibling, he can't really make out the shape of the mouth. So it's hard for him to pick up language and things like that. And so I did a little research on it, on what you're discussing. It says that some recent research suggests that vision disorders, may explain autism development, which gets to like the heart of the issue. And he was like, I never heard this. He's like, so then he like started Googling it, and there is optometrists that specialize, and so he like is making an appointment today.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And he's like, it makes sense to me. He's like his eyes are actually like, they really never seem in focus. He's like, I never even thought of it. So can you talk about autism and vision disorders?
Yeah, well, it's a speculative hypothesis, and I have tried to get some ophthalmologists and optometrists interested in it, and there are some, and as you said, there is some research out there showing that if you're born blind, for example, that your risk of autism is way higher than I don't remember the exact number, but maybe 4 to 10 times higher or something than a child who's not blind at birth. Yeah, so it's I became interested in the problem from a number of angles. First, being a pediatrician, we hear about autism incidence, prevalence increasing, and a lot of that is due to expansion of the definition. We put kids who we once would have just said, they're a little socially awkward or so on. Now they get put on the spectrum. So that's part of it. And there's more awareness, and that's all good because those kids get services then and need help. But it sort of muddies the waters a little when we're trying to figure out what I would call maybe old school autism, the autism that that you and I, just as casual observers, would say, oh yeah, that child has a problem. They're maybe they're not verbal, maybe they're making flapping motions and not meeting your eye, and you immediately recognize there's some social deficits there. So so that's part of the autism issue. But it got me thinking that about some of the things I knew as an anthropologist, particularly from the primate literature, that if you look at the human eyeball, we have the white conjunctiva surrounding the sclera, and the other primates don't do that. And there's the phrase, don't shoot till you see the whites of their eyes, and so on. We key on that. It allows us to see where people are looking. It allows us to, that, along with all the other facial muscles that we have compared to the other apes, it allows others to see what we're feeling. It sort of allows them to read our minds more so than other apes are able to do back and forth in their social situation. So that led me then to think, well, if, knowing that we're the hypersocial species and developing social skills is so important, and some of these changes in the face and so on and in the eyes have occurred, maybe that is a way of allowing newborns and infants and even a little bit older children to really key in on and learn to be social, to learn from mom and other caretakers what they're feeling and how they're interacting and how to react to certain social stimuli and so on. And that then led me to propose that maybe if we checked the vision of infants early on and found deficits, if we were able to correct those deficits, perhaps we could prevent the development of some autism. I don't think this is explaining all types of autism, but I think it possibly contributes. And then if you want to hear a little bit more of a complex explanation, I tied that into these reading glasses that we all have to start wearing when we're in our 40s and 50s. The term is presbyopia. And the picture looks like this, that we delayed our aging or senescence in most respects, allowing us to have a double lifespan like we already talked about. But for some reason, we didn't delay the decline in our near vision. Our decline in near vision starts to happen at around age 40 or 50, which is the same as what happens with chimpanzees and other apes and presumably our common ancestor. So it looks like for some reason, natural selection was stymied in its ability to push the aging of the near vision component of our sight to later and later ages. And it's a handicap up to a certain extent. The chimpanzees, when they groom when they're young, they're real close. They're help pulling off insects and stuff. But when they're in their 40s, they're like us old people. They're going like that, trying to find these things. But the difference is, they only live a few years with that because they're all dead by the time they're 50. Or we can go on for another 30, 40 years with this handicap. So that got me thinking that strong selection acting on a system real early in life can lead to more rapid aging or senescence in that component later in life. We generally think aging happens in tandem, and it usually does. But there's been there's a really cool paper out recently. I can't remember the author's name offhand, showing that, in fact, if there is strong selection on a certain component, then that can delay or weaken selection later in life on that component and delay the ability to ameliorate that aging or senescent effect. So in that way, I sort of connected, the failure of near vision early in life and the importance of upgraded near vision in very early life. And I've connected them genetically, hypothetically, with the concept of what's called antagonistic pleiotropic genes. And those are generally the types of genes that we think cause most aging. These are genes that have positive effects early, but potentially big negative effects late. But those big negative effects get discounted by the very weak selection that's happening later in life. And so that's why we think aging itself has evolved. So it's a very speculative paper, even by my standards, and I'm not shy about speculation. I think it's very safe to speculate. That's where new good ideas come from, even though some of them turn out to be wrong. We just have to be sure to label our speculations as speculative and not just jump to the conclusion that they're correct just because they're cool or they seem to make sense. So that's kind of where we are with this idea with vision and autism, and especially that idea that links early, really good close vision with later, really poor close vision. It's a pretty speculative area, but very interesting to me. And as we already mentioned, if there's any truth to the hypothesis, it would give a pretty easy way to reduce the development of autism, at least in a proportion of kids. And that would just be to, put spectacles on them early or something like that if we noticed that they had poor vision early in life. So, that's an area that I really hope more vision experts will pick up on. But we'll see what happens. I hope something comes of it for your friend.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're talking about how how body parts age at different rates, and then we're talking about eye vision and glasses, and to think like glasses were invented in the 1200s. So it's like 900 year of having corrective lenses.
Right.
It's one of the easier things for humans to actually correct or fix. And so like evolution is kind of making it easy for us to fix that aspect. We're like, oh, well, like it'd be way worse to, not be able to have limbs working properly or something. I mean,
absolutely. Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. That's the cool part about it. We do have remedies out there for this. And if we knew more about it, especially for the young babies, we'd be able to potentially to do something useful for them that would help reduce some components of autism.
Touching a little bit back on the autism and vision, you actually just kind of jogged my memory. In the 1980s, I grew up in foster homes, and I had like 19, foster brothers and sisters. One of them was blind. He's born blind, and like he had major behavioral problems.
Sure.
And think like, oh, it's just like, oh, maybe can't see. Obviously, it's a little bit harder to
Sure.
do childhood functions. But now, when you kind of tie this in together, is actually it's another angle I never would have thought about.
Yeah. Being totally blind, we start learning how to be social creatures real early. I mean, in human babies, we start getting those big social smiles at 4 to 5, 6 weeks of age. They can recognize mom's face and prefer it, and dad's face. They soon start following when you point. We're physically very helpless. The term's altricial, but we're mentally, especially socially, mentally very, very precocious. 2-year-olds are able to pick up on social nuances that even adult chimpanzees are incapable of, and that we just ramp up in our terms of our social behavior and how to interact with other people real early on. So yeah, your foster brother who was blind had, as you said, there's many handicaps that come from being blind. So you have to sort of sort them out, but that very well could be one of them that just very early on didn't get the right cues.
Kind of moving on from autism to maybe more something like teenagers would experience, which would be anxiety. And in your book, you say basically that we treat anxiety like a disease, but it's a signal and it's an evolved guidance mechanism that we need to learn to work with. Right. And then later on, you basically say that, antidepressants don't work as advertised. Over the long run, they're less effective than sustained exercise. And in the last chapter of your book, you basically say that you used to be like a jogger, and then, you kind of then decided like, you need to have more variety. And then you climb, you put up a rope in your yard where you climb up a tree. I believe you said it was like 20 feet. But it's like amazing, like, and you mentioned like Peter Attia, or however you pronounce his name, but he always talks a lot about like exercise. Like exercise is like the best thing to prevent Alzheimer's. It's the best thing to prevent, like anxiety and all this stuff. And you mentioned like, you need a sense of purpose. You need to be working towards goals. I mean, maybe if you're sitting around all day on social media, maybe you feel like a POS, like maybe get outside, like climb that rope, or, hang out with your friends or play pickleball or whatever,
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think this is a large part of the social, uh, 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 well, the sort of quote mental illness problems that are supposed to be so common among teenagers these days. That it's I think we could quickly eliminate a good portion of it, just as you say, by having them put down their phones or turn off their screens. Now, I mean, of course, you and I were not totally against that, or we wouldn't be right here. These are wonderful inventions too, but yeah, getting outside and being active, and just walking through the forest, exercising, all of those things are good for mental health. And anxiety, yes. I mean, we all feel anxiety, and if I could give you a pill to make you never feel anxiety, that would be bad for you. You're supposed to feel anxious if you get in your buddy's car and he's driving 100 miles an hour and you're telling him slow down, slow down. But if you're not anxious about that and say, oh, go faster, that's not good. We need to. Anxiety serves a purpose, so we need to not get rid of it. We need to learn how to deal with it, and I think we do need to understand that in modern settings there may be more triggers for anxiety than there used to be. You maybe have heard of Randy Nessie's. Well, I know you have because you're reading his book, Good Reasons for Bad Feelings. But he talks about the smoke alarm analogy with anxiety. We set our smoke alarms so that they go off just because the toast is burning, but we set them very sensitively. They're going off all the time in order to not miss the one time when the house is actually burning down. And so we probably have a fairly sensitive anxiety trigger that's evolved in us too, because I think in the book I talk about how if you're asleep at the camp at night and you hear a rustling in the bushes, if you don't get a little anxious and prepare for it being something dangerous, that can be a real problem. Even though most of the time the rustling just turns out to be a bird or a squirrel or something. So we've evolved this sensitive trigger, and now that we are living in an environment where there are more triggers than ever before, including things like your so-called friend on social media telling you you're a moron and that you deserve to die or whatever. Those are triggers that we never had before, because we used to live in these kinship networks where people were more supportive. It's not like we never had competition, but there was not all of this random, you're a horrible person, being fed to these teenagers over and over again. But that, in combination with just the difficulties and extra options that our teenagers have, and which are good, but they have a lot more to figure out than a hunter-gatherer kid did. A hunter-gatherer kid had to figure out, am I going to sit back and camp and make arrows, or am I going to be the guy out, running down zebra or something? The nowadays kids have so much more to figure out, so they get anxious. And then if they're not making progress, they start to feel sad and so on. And then they don't have all the support that we used to have in our extended kinship networks. And then they're being piled on by so-called friends on social media. So there's a lot of reasons for our teenagers, especially, to be feeling angst and down and out. And the solution, as you already clearly put it, is to put down the phones and get outside and you know, try to do something useful and helpful both for yourself and for others.
Since you are an actual medical doctor and you're a practicing pediatrician, how common is it for parents to come in with their children and have like depression, anxiety? Is that like one of the more common things that people come in? Or are they going to, I guess a psychiatrist for that? But I mean, it seems like this would be something. I mean, if you read like a Jonathan Haidt book or something like that, I mean, like, what does he call it? Like, the anxiety generation.
Yeah, I mean, it's more and more common. And I think I've been doing this, for going on 3 decades, and I've seen an increase. And again, partly because there's more awareness, but I think that the social media and screens, throw in the pandemic where kids were, stuck at home for a couple years, all those different things have led to increases. And so we as primary care pediatricians see it every day. And unfortunately, it's not just in our teenagers. We're seeing it sometimes in our 8 and 9 and 10-year-olds are already, starting to feel overwhelmed. And they need extra support and good advice from parents. And if grandparents were around, it'd be all the better. A lot of them get sent to psychiatrists, and a lot of them get put on medicines, probably too many in my opinion. But doctors are trying to fix things, and they're trying to do a good job. And it's only been recently that there was this big meta-analysis showing that these SSR antidepressants really don't work quite as well as advertised. And it's hard to say whether they have an effect that's better than just a placebo effect. But we do know that being socially engaged and being outside and exercising, that those have lasting positive effects. I mean, I think, we were talking about how we're designed to feel sad and anxious in certain situations, but we're also designed to feel happy in certain situations. And that's a prod or a guidance mechanism to keep pushing us in that direction. And I think, the main thing is, and I think in Randy's book, he'll second this, is that if we're making progress towards goals, we tend to be happy. If we feel stymied and we're just not getting anywhere, that's when we start to feel sad and down and out. But so the happy feelings are saying keep doing what you're doing. The sad feelings are saying, well, let's maybe reassess and change direction a little bit. And if we take drugs that make us feel happy without good reason, maybe that sets us back over the long run of life, when we're supposed to be steering the boat in a direction that, leads to more and more happiness, because it's steering us in a direction where we're accomplishing goals that are important to us. If we interfere with that system, maybe we're not doing these kids a service.
Finishing this topic up, but like, it seems like everyone wants like the magic bullet. If kids, parents come to you and mom or dad's like, my teenage daughter's got depression, and you're like, okay, like, get the daughter off the social media, have her play with some friends, etc. Like, what's their reaction? Do they just want a pill, or do they think that's like, it almost seems like they might feel themselves like they're personally being attacked, because they're then questioning their parental skills or something, versus like, oh, there's something wrong with them, this is easier to solve.
Yeah, you have to be, pretty subtle and careful about how you present those ideas, because you really don't want to blame anybody. But yeah, I get some parents, that are real receptive to the idea. I start explaining to them, like I make an analogy to physical pain, that if you stick your hand in the fire and you don't feel pain, that's not going to be good for you. You have to feel that pain. And so, giving pills to make you never feel mental pain can be as bad as giving you a pill to never make you feel physical pain. And, you know, some people, they start to engage in that, and they get it. And I say, you know, so some of it's taken you a while to sort of get feeling down and into your funk, and it might take a while to get out of it, but we got to start doing things. We got to get outside more. We got to put out the phones. You got to sign up for soccer or theater, all these different things. And yeah, it's harder. Your initial premise is, you know, as you were stating it, is people would love a pill. They'll just fix it like that for me with a pill or a magic wand, but it just doesn't work that way. And some of my patients get it, and others, you know, they're resistant, and some of them, you know, maybe, even though I try not to blame anybody, maybe some of them feel blame, and you know, they say to me, the thing, I know other psychiatrists who don't like this either, but they'll say, but I have a chemical imbalance. You know, they're essentially saying that my brain's not working correctly. Give me something to fix that. And then, you know, they want a medicine, and I often will end up sending them to a psychiatrist. In our practice, I mean, we try medicine sometimes short term. I always tell parents and kids that, you know, we'll maybe give you this. It might help a little, and but we want to get you off it as quickly as possible. But I try to resist, but I'm you know, I'm in a system where parents are being told all the time by experts, and also just social media and the television and all that all their child really needs is a pill to fix the problem. And so we're up against that, and it's hard to convince everybody like you are imagining here. Yeah.
What would be like, say, like 3 of the most common reasons that parents bring their children to see you? In reading your book, Bringing Up Baby, you started the book basically talking about breastfeeding. So it seems like that would probably be common. You talk a lot about allergies, and I know that you're, you know, a pretty big expert on allergies and allergens, and we're significantly ahead of the curve on that. Of course, we were talking about depression, autism, talking about anxiety that you discuss in the book. So what would be like a few of the very most common things that parents have?
Yeah. So it sort of divided into different age groups. So early on, you know, in the first months of life, 2 of the big ones are, as you said, breastfeeding and how to get that going and keep it going. And unfortunately, I say we, I mean us doctors and other health professionals sometimes interfere with that. But the big thing is we don't grow up with it in our society. So, you know, there are many, you know, very intelligent moms and dads who come into my practice with, you know, their newborn, and they've never really seen a baby breastfeeding. They've never, I mean, I've got some dads who've never held a baby before until their own baby's born. So there's this lack of modeling out there. There's lack of familiarity. And then, as I said, we doctors and other healthcare people add to their anxiety by, you know, worrying a lot about weight gain. We babies who are breastfed will lose weight early on in the first few days, because it takes a few days for milk to come in, and that's normal. And we're often too quick to interfere and say, "Oh, the weight's down here. You better try some formula," and that sort of short circuits the mechanism of the more the baby sucks, the more vigorous the baby is about sucking, the better and faster the milk comes in. So we do those kinds of things that interfere. You know, C-sections, which can be life-saving and necessary, can interfere because they alter, you know, they don't follow the timing that's evolved between mom and baby for when milk's supposed to come in, and, you know, to get breastfeeding started. Inductions, you know, obstetricians get nervous if a baby's a week late. They start worrying, thinking maybe we better do an induction. And again, I'm not saying you never do those things, because they can be life-saving and useful. But I think I think they're overdone. And if we had a little bit more evolution mindedness, and a little more a little more trust in our adaptations and in our evolved design, we might be a little more leery of saying, okay, well, everything looks good, but let's do an induction anyway, and those things interfere with breastfeeding. So I try to get parents to relax. I try to get them to stop. They come from the hospital with their spreadsheets. The babies had this many dirty diapers and this many wet diapers, and that has nursed this long and this many times. I try to get them to put those down and don't be quite so quantitative about it, to relax, look at your baby. If your baby's vigorous and willing to nurse and all that, she's probably doing fine, even if she hasn't had a dirty diaper in 24 hours. She's looking good. Don't worry about it. It'll happen. So that's one of the things that I talk a lot about, is getting breastfeeding going and sustaining it. As for sustaining it, in our society, a lot of people don't know that we've evolved to breastfeed for 2 or 3 years, and it's okay to do that. Now, we have a lot more alternative foods, of course, in this day and age than we used to. So not everybody has to breastfeed that long. I'd like to get people to do it for at least a year, but longer if they can. So I like to encourage it and tell parents that it's okay, even though grandma or the neighbors saying, boy, it's weird, your 8-month-old still breastfeeding. Well, it's not weird. 8 months, it's okay to do that. So we do a lot of that, a lot of reassurance. Then the other big thing early on is sleep. And this feeds back into breastfeeding also, because U.S. pediatricians where the American Academy of Pediatrics is very much against co-sleeping. It's starting to change. They're starting to soften their stance a little, and they're doing it even more so in European countries. And in my book, I point out that in Japan, co-sleeping is the rule, and they have half the sudden infant death syndrome that we do and half the infant mortality rates that we do. So it's not co-sleeping per se that's dangerous, but it's dangerous types of co-sleeping that are dangerous. If you're doing it on real soft mattresses or on a couch where baby can slip between the cushions, or you've got big coverings or things like that, you have to be careful about doing it. But it's easier to make breastfeeding work and to sustain it if baby's right there with you, doing what a German pediatrician has called breast sleeping. This is the way we always used to sleep until the last few hundred years. There was no separate rooms or separate beds or anything like that. Mom and baby slept together. And so that's another thing. If you're really against co-sleeping, because the American Academy of Pediatrics says that, you have to temper that a little bit with the idea that we have been co-sleeping with our babies, for 6 million years, and before that, from the time we split off with the other apes. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's the best way to do it, but it's sort of one of the points in favor of it that we should take more into account. So we talk a lot about sleeping. Those are two of the big issues, and all parents who come in, even ones who have read a lot and know a lot, are always surprised by the lack of sleep and how tired they are early on. So we talk about ways of coping and having dad help. And the absence of these kinship networks, the grandmothers and the grandfathers and the aunts and uncles nearby that we used to have, that's really burdensome on new parents. And I think that's part of the reason why, so many people these days are choosing, to only have one child or to not reproduce at all, is because it's made more difficult by the absence of help. So those parents who come into my office with grandma there at their side, I always applaud that and cheer grandma on for being there and being a resource. Now, of course, sometimes, grandma says, yeah, I'm here for a week and then I got to fly back to, Nevada or whatever. But, it's if we're going to single out one change that's occurred with respect to child rearing, that's changed since we've modernized and settled down. It's the breakdown of kinship networks that comes now that we're a very mobile society. And so, yeah, in the last half of my book, I encourage grandparents to, by telling them they'll be happy if they, are helpful to their children and grandchildren. But I know I wanted to mention this. You mentioned the title at the very beginning of chapter 8. It's that's a play on the Star Trek thing of live long and prosper. And I say live long and be helpful, because being helpful is what allowed us to live long. And I think that just being helpful in general, even if we don't have grandchildren nearby, there's always way to help kids, always ways to help young dependents, even the young dependents of other species like cats and dogs. And I think by being helpful, we increase our happiness overall. And it's just amazing to me how many old people are on antidepressants. And I think if they would consider doing something useful for their grandchildren, or if they don't have them, for any child or anybody or anything really, that would really contribute to mental health and mental well-being of the elderly.
In the book, you also talk a little bit about demographics, and you kind of now with people having less kids, so kind of like thinking, so people are having less kids now. So you almost have like this over-parenting where you're talking about parents coming to you, bringing in like Excel spreadsheets of like their kids' bowel movements. I mean, back, 50 years ago, I guess you didn't have the Excel spreadsheet, but you could have had a notebook. But it's like you had like 4 or 5 kids. You probably didn't have the time.
Exactly.
I had Timothy Carney on, who had a book on over-parenting. And I think he said basically like once you have like over 4 kids, it's actually easier to be a parent, because you just don't have time to be, you're outnumbered substantially by the kids, and you just realize, okay, like let the oldest take over, or like, you're not going to be perfect because you just don't have the time. And then just thinking like, where you're basically, and that, kind of saying that kids have always been hard, where you're saying like economists say kids used to be like a net positive economically. Maybe you had a farm, you had 12 kids, and so you had 12 helping hands, whatever, but it's not like those were 12 helping hands from born to 18 years old. Right. And then, it's interesting because you did this like field study in the 1980s, I believe in 1984, you were in Micronesia on a 363 acre island where that was pretty much untouched. So you kind of actually got to see more of like a quote unquote hunter gatherer lifestyle. But could you kind of talk about your theory on demographics and, maybe even over-parenting as we call it?
Sure. Yeah. So those are good points and good questions. So so back in the 80s, when I was trying to figure out what to do as a dissertation, I was interested in the, because I was trained in evolutionary biology, I was interested in why people these days in modern countries, didn't want to have as many kids as they possibly could, because that's the norm. If you go to any hunter-gatherer or horticultural society and ask people how many kids they want to have, they say as many as we can. And so what explains that, and the people at the time who were also interested in that question were economists and economic-minded demographers, and they had this idea that it was summarized maybe as the wealth flows hypothesis. And the idea was that back in the day, the net flow of wealth was upwards from kids eventually to parents, and nowadays the net flow is downwards. So kids are expensive, so you limit what economists call the consumption of children, just like you limit the consumption of other expensive goods. And so you have few of them or none of them. Whereas when they were making you wealthy, you had as many as you wanted. And that didn't make sense from an evolutionary point of view. Going back to what we talked about earlier, I could not see how we evolved a double maximum lifespan by economically exploiting our kids once we were in old age. I figured it had to be the other way around. We had to be helpful because that's the only way to keep selection stronger for longer in order to hold off aging. And so they had their data, which they got. It was survey data, but I didn't trust it. And so I went off to this little atoll called Evolutionary, as you mentioned. And my wife and I, Laura Betzig, who's an evolutionary historian, by the way, who's doing incredible work. I describe it in chapter 8 too. But she and I together did these behavioral scans where we would walk through the island every day, writing down randomly who was doing what with whom at what ages and all of that. And we were able to establish, I think for the first time empirically, that grandparents in these traditional settings actually weren't sitting around just being taken care of. They were working to the best of their ability and helping out. And, they became old and died and were maybe dependent for a few weeks of life, but it wasn't like today where people get old and debilitated and linger, for 4 or 5 years. And it's not like that. Going back to the Peter Attia thing, slow death, fast death. There wasn't slow death back then. And so it's certainly true that children would do things for their grandparents, but the net flow was always downward. So kids were always expensive. They did become more expensive when the kinship networks broke down and they got concentrated on nuclear families, as we already talked about. And then there's this overparenting, like you were saying, there's this inflation in the costs of kids that some people engage in where they feel like, I have to hover over my child every minute of every day and, and pour this and that bit of investment into them. So that contributed also. And I have to say that I have some really large families in my practice. And they, as you were saying, they tend to be great. They have 4, 5, 6 kids, and the older siblings are helping out, and the parents have, everything runs smoothly. There's not the same stress as there is in some of these smaller families because they often have kin nearby in these families. They live more in farming communities, a lot of them, and so. Those are some changes that I think contribute to demographic transition. And I think the idea that I put out in some papers in the late 80s from my field work on Evolutionary still stand today and are recognized by a lot of people as probably the explanation for why we've transitioned to having fewer and fewer kids.
Right now, almost 20% of the U.S. population is 65 or older. And of course, it's going to continue to get older. Yeah. It's going to continue to get older and be a higher percentage. And, in the book, you talk about like diet and how like younger, you use the example of the fruit flies, but basically like younger humans have the ability to kind of eat, may say like a less pristine diet because their body is just kind of, is more adaptable. Then as you get older, you probably should be cutting out some stuff and really watch what you eat. And you're mentioning how different body parts age at different rates. But, especially, we're like right now where, Social Security and Medicaid, Medicare are like, what is that, like 40% of GDP or whatever. So like at some point, these systems might break. So if you were advising policy, what would be like recommendations to keep older people healthy for longer? So we're not, what is it? 25% of healthcare is spent in the last 1 year of someone's life. So how do we age gracefully, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And wouldn't it be wonderful if, that 20% of healthcare dollars that we spend keeping, people alive for the last year, when they're usually not in a very happy or functional state, if we could divert some of that to caring for younger people, that in itself would be great. But I mean, I think it's never too late to start. But the earlier we can encourage people to start eating a healthier diet and exercise, the better. And yeah, the fruit fly study I think is really, really an interesting one. You can find it on YouTube. It's a presentation at the Ancestral Health Society by Michael Rose. But he and one of his students, Grant Rutledge, or maybe one of his postdocs, did this real cool study showing that fruit flies adapted to eating a new diet when they were young relatively quickly, whereas old flies didn't adapt. Even after 100 generations, they still hadn't adapted well to a new diet. And so that's pretty equivalent to about the 10,000 years of since humans have settled down, become farmers, and increasingly have worked grains into our diets, and now increasingly refined grains and refined sugars and so on. And so we can expect, based on the fruit fly experiment, we can expect that young children or that children and young people have adapted to those new diets better than older people have. And so, yeah, when you get to age 40 or 50, it's time to start thinking about cutting back on the pancakes and the pastas and stuff that you used to be able to handle pretty well. And if you do some of that, cutting back, you'll slim down, you'll be healthier. Type 2 diabetes will be less likely to develop. Cardiac disease, hypertension, all of those things. The whole metabolic syndrome is less likely to develop. Healthcare dollars will be saved big time. And these older people, in their 50s, 60s, 70s and beyond, will be happier and more useful and more able to do useful things, including for their grandchildren. I started all this early. As I said in the book, I was a runner and I do lots of other things. And I put up this rope in my yard, right out there, hanging from the tree that I climb. You don't necessarily have to put up a 20-foot rope and climb it, when you're in your 70s, but you do need to put forth some effort. And it can be just walking and, not pulling through the drive-through as often, and trying to eat more fruits and vegetables, and staying away from the highly processed foods. I mean, even a little bit of that would make a big difference, I think, in terms of, the allocation of our healthcare dollars and general good health of people once they, pass the 50-year mark.
What's one evolutionary concept that you wish every parent knew when they were leaving the hospital with their newborn that'd make parenting just significantly easier, less stressful?
Well, one of the things we've already mentioned, I wish that they knew that we once lived in these kinship networks, and I wish that they would do what they can to, recreate those or mimic them to the extent that they can. My daughter, for example, when she got pregnant with our first grandchild, they moved from Cambridge, Massachusetts back to, back near us. So we could help out. So that would be important. But I think if this one overarching thing would be, for parents to understand that, yes, it is a lot of work, but also that, reproducing is what all life ultimately has been designed to do. We've been designed to survive only to the extent that helps reproduction. And that's because no form of life has found a way of avoiding extinction just by putting all their effort into survival. We all reach a point, all different organisms, and reach a point where you have to reproduce in order not to go extinct. So it's something that we've been designed to do. And everything in biology happens with mechanisms. And when something is hard work and we're designed to do it, one of the ways of getting us to do it is by building in rewards. And I think there's nothing more rewarding than having children and doing a good job rearing them. And then once you've done that, hopefully they've had kids, and then you can continue that process with your grandchildren. And I think that there's stumbles and obstacles all along the way, and moments when it's not, always, gleeful and happy, but overall that it's the way to build a happy life. So your newborn's kept you up all night, but, she's 5 weeks old now, and you wake up in the morning and you get that big smile from her, or, the first giggles, that's just the most rewarding and wonderful thing. Makes life purposeful and useful and happy. So that's the point that I most wish every parent knew.
Today's guest has been Dr. Paul Turke, who is a pediatrician and anthropologist. Today we discussed his new book, Bringing Up Baby. So, Paul, can you just let people know where they can get a hold of you, get a hold of your research and your new book, Bringing Up Baby? And then after that, just leave us with a final thought just to wrap up this podcast.
So you can go to my website, which is just paulturke.com. Turke is with an E on the end. And you can... There's a link there to my book. It's available on Amazon. I'll put a link to this podcast up there too, so anybody who wants to can get to it through that. People can also, if you're anywhere near our area and you want to come to our practice, they can come to Turke and Thomas Show Pediatrics in Dexter, Michigan. We also have an office website called dexterpediatricians.com, and that has a link to my book also. I'm pretty accessible on Google. You can find me. So I guess I just want to leave you with a thank you for inviting me to talk about this. I think the having children and encouraging people to have children, but only if they want them. I don't want people who don't want children to. I want people who are going to do a good job to have them. But I think the planet will benefit. That our children are going to. We have a lot of problems in the world, and even bigger ones to come. Down the road, and our children are going to be the ones who are going to be able to solve those problems. I think my final sentence would be: live long and be helpful.
My dear friends, that is it for this episode of El Podcast. Once again, if you're not yet subscribed, please subscribe on YouTube as well as Rumble. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from. We thank you all from the bottom of our hearts for watching and listening, and we will see you on the next episode.